Hi, everyone. Welcome to this discussion on doing sociology on a very interesting and different kind of topic. Today, we are going to talk about sociology of sports, emerging trends and issues. And we have four young researchers who are doing great and interesting work around sociology of sports. So, I welcome the four panelists or speakers to our forum, and I'm going to introduce them before they speak so that it's easier to sort of relate who is working on what. Our first speaker today is going to actually talk about the field in sport, scale, scope, and linkages. And he is Balbir Singh Aulakh, who is a doctoral scholar at the School of Habitat Studies, Tata Institute of Social Sciences, TIS Mumbai. He is interested in doing empirical work focusing on sports, land, and urban areas, and his ongoing doctoral research looks at football and kabaddi in Mumbai. Balbir, I'm so glad that you had time to join. Thank you so much, and over to you. We look forward to hearing you.
Oh, great. Thanks very much. And really great to have an opportunity to have, a group here that sort of shares such a common interest, but also something that is also at the periphery, both in our academic discourse, but also in our own societies, like more and more, right? Whether it's schools and like more and more subjects coming up, more skills courses coming up, like sports has sort of taken a backseat altogether. I mean, like at different levels of, and that's something important, right? Like when I use the word levels as well, sport is something that each one of us, right, experience at different scales today. Correct, which means that sport is no longer something that uh, could be limited to or could be limited in our understanding to someone going out and playing. It's something that you have on your wristwatch, like with your wristwatch and smartwatches, and the way in which you sort of have fitness as a very regular part sort of embedded in your life today, and those kinds of activities that are linked to it. So with the embeddedness of technology within play culture and physical culture, that's one scale. At the same time, your phone, OTT, and all of that, it's also the same experience that a lot of people who do sociological studies with regards to fan cultures, for instance, right? Whether it's the experience at the stadium, or even, for example, in your hall room setting, or even, for example, when people continue to work and actually watch sports now on their cell phones, right? So there's a lot of scaling here that one experiences. Similarly, there's also scaling and sort of an embeddedness in some sense when one looks at sports in a more spatial sense, right? Sports has continued to kind of emerge from large open spaces, which are maybe formal, maybe mostly informal, right, in nature, and more specifically, then down to the spatiality in which the societies have then grown in India, whether it's gully, for instance, or a neighborhood, or a chauraha, for instance. So these are always spaces and spatialities which have produced sporting knowledge. And that's kind of where I want to also keep my topic, right, which is exactly where the field is, correct? And that's also very important when we do empirical work continuously in sport, that to sort of identify and pinpoint that, okay, this is empirically the site of my study. And when I say the field, while the field continues to evolve, it's always relevant to sort of be able to pinpoint as to what scale and as to what site you are talking about. So I mean, that goes for every space that we work with, but also most relevant in sports because it's like quote unquote a global phenomenon, correct? And in that sense, then it becomes relevant that the kind of knowledge being produced stems from which kind of geography, and how that geography allows us to sort of, produce or generate or even to have a conversation with other forms of knowledge that exist or have come to this particular geography, which has produced a particular kind of spatiality, a particular kind of trend in which things are moving. So when I see the field, a lot of people, and this is more of a methodological, space here as well, where usually a lot of sports studies that we see today are also provocations, right? And like these provocations are essentially kind of events which regularly happen in India at different scales, whether it's a city level, a mission mode planning that is being done. So maybe mega events, for example, and some sort of cleanliness, aestheticization of the those. So those are also fields in which we find investigations today happening, and that's stemming from a form of provocation, right? Another one, of course, is movements, for instance, how movements for particular forms of rights for particular groups also allow for certain kinds of access for them to be able to express themselves more freely in both more particularly urban areas, but also perhaps now in rural areas, right? The other more specific point which has sort of restricted, attention today is on budgeting more specifically. We continue to see, in bits and pieces, how national dailies sort of carry, maybe in a mega event year, the sports ministry's budget in their, newspapers, correct? And a lot of this kind of discourse has also naturally come up. So again, these are also provocations which sort of are linked to maybe a mega event, maybe to a particular kind of newspaper, particularly sort of moving towards a particular conversation or so on and so forth. Most importantly, investigations in sports are very much personal. Okay, so even as a scholar myself, most of my investigations in sports or interest in academics altogether come because I was like an athlete, a track athlete all my life. Like, so what has really prompted is that personal interest. So to recognize where you are coming as well to the field is of utmost importance, and that kind of breaks a lot of barriers for you and allows you for a lot of that trust building that goes on in the field. uh, there are also issues that, more importantly, a question to be asked, that what are the issues that prompt governments to make policies and provisions for sports, right? When did sports become a very big part of the Indian state or different governments, each of them their discourses, right? A lot of corporations today or urban local bodies are very new in India. They still don't have very much parks, gardens, playgrounds as part of their budgetary and even planning priorities, correct? So when does sport become a priority for a government? What are the underlying issues that prompt any policy or provision is also very relevant to understanding when we arrive at a field. Most importantly, then a lot of sports studies today are historical in nature as well. Like we rely a lot on the past. So what past are we talking about? Like, is we of course have to be very cautious about which sports have colonial, sort of heritages, for instance, and what kind of spatial dimensions then does those colonial sort of planning and instrumentality sort of bring? What are those interpretations of the past, definitions of the past, and questions that arise from those past? And is there a consensus within sociology and also history, right? Which, I was just reading 5 books before coming here, and all books written on India and sports speak about the dominance of history and sociology in sports. And as to whether we have a consensus on the definitions of past and the questions that we are asking about the past is very relevant there, as to what we make sense of today as sports and like our own aesthetic sense, right? Also, the approach sort of adopted to capture the field reflects the kind of sources we continue to use. So archival research, for instance, is very important. Surveys are something that we can continue to do with the emergence of technology. It's much more easier as well. And for something like sports, that's very, pertinent. But archives are something that is mirrored, sort of like embedded with challenges of translation with regards to language, for example. I'm someone who has stayed in Mumbai for a very long time, and I know Marathi. So when I have to look at the archives for a sport which is only recorded in Marathi, like it's easier. But like for someone who is, for example, from Karnataka and wants to study kabaddi in Maharashtra, it becomes a big challenge. So translation and languages are something that has to be at the heart of methodological contributions when Indian sports researchers actually talk. So, those are some things that I wanted to point out. I lastly want to sort of pin together what the scale, scope, and linkage mean. When we say scale, it means spatiality, it means timelines of different forms, right? It also means a clear conversation between what is public and what is private, especially because when we talk about land. So things completely change. What do we mean by formal playing cultures and informal playing cultures, whether it's rule based or not rules based, whether these rules are formally recognized by particular codes which are national and international in nature. So those are also different sort of scales in which we interact. So just to lay it out there. Another is scope, of course, right? So of course there's when we say scope, we mean the event itself that you're studying. What's the scope of that event? What's the geography, for example, that you're looking at? Is it the neighborhood, or is it a ward, for example, or is it a political constituency that interests you? Whether it's a politician who continues to contribute in sports, right? We want to go and check out, okay, what does he or she have or they have done for their own political constituency. So what's the scope in that sense? The geographical embeddedness sort of brings that. Another, of course, is institutions. A lot of sports studies today speak of the contribution of X organization to this sport in the city. For example, a lot of PhD theses. So institutions then become relevant. Along with institutions, then processes and people become relevant. What is the contribution of A, B, and C to this sport? And these are the kinds of studies that we continue to see. Uh, Most importantly, are linkages, though. These are mostly disciplinary linkages, right, where we want to continue to engage with a lot of themes and concepts. So one thing that from my own study that I bring is a closer linkage between urban studies to leisure and sports studies in India through more particularly the empirical concept of land, and how land in itself sort of allows us to explore forms of continuity and disjunctures within transformations that we are currently seeing in urban areas. So those are one ways in which you could perhaps frame some of our questions as well, which allows us to have that disciplinary dialogue across different streams. I would just like to lastly end with some considerations for in within sports, which we have, kind of lacked in our own analysis at some or the other point, even the books that I've continued to read. One is demography itself, right? We have hardly introduced demographic studies with sports studies in India, whereas, historically, whether it's Europe, Latin America, regions in Africa, when it's a study of decolonizing, particular sports, demography and demographic patterns have always been at the forefront. Those kinds of analysis, are just simply lacking in India. Another is ecology, which has had a good fair share of focus, for example, particularly with regards to aesthetics. And there are different scholars which we know that have written about aesthetics and ecology in relations to culture, and more specifically cultural expression, including sports. Another is housing type. The kind of house that you live in is the kind of sports that you play in, is a very common myth. Whether it's true or no, is completely a different thing, right? And lastly, I would like to sort of conclude, right, with the idea that we need more and more original databases coming out of different geographies, being relevant and sensitive to the geographies that we speak, because there's clearly a lack of them, right? There's no starting point for someone like me who wants to know, okay, how many, for example, cricket clubs exist, for example, in Jharkhand. Like a district-wise division, for example, of these clubs. I'm speaking of a popular sport, going to the list of number of sports, like the popularity contest sort of dies down. It's also relevant to sort of understand the role judiciary from time to time has played in order to simplify sports in practice. So court documents and accessing court the material is also very relevant and something that is useful as a methodological tool for scholars, which we have seen while on studies regarding housing struggles in urban areas. Of course, like how courts have played their own share in planning and evictions. But that's also very true for sports. And sports is not some very new idea that, okay, we need to find new methodologies for. You already have so many disciplinary contributions that we should bring forward to in sports. And that's the kind of comparative analysis and a question, right, as to how do we engage with this comparison. between, okay, does what Mumbai do with kabaddi and cricket is relevant for Ahmedabad as well, right? And those kind of comparisons could only happen when we actually have original databases and a kind of clear understanding as to how each sport has evolved. So yeah, with this, I would like to leave, and yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Balbir, for sort of laying out the larger theoretical and methodological issues in the sociology of sports. I would now like to invite Aashish, who is currently working as an assistant professor of sociology at Rajiv Gandhi National University of Law, Patiala, and he's also pursuing his PhD at Punjab University, Chandigarh. His research interests include culture, gender, the sociology of law, and the sociology of sports. He has a strong affinity for qualitative research techniques and is an ethnographer at heart. And his work is grounded in a variety of academic fields, including sociology, anthropology, law, history, and area studies. Aashish Gaur is going to speak about sports washing and the intersection of sports with politics and perception. Over to you, Aashish.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Rituparna, and thank you for the wonderful introduction. So, and this whole idea of connecting sociology and with sports is very close to my heart, as I used to play cricket professionally, and I'm an avid sports follower, be it cricket, football, tennis, or even chess. And the recent rise of many grandmasters from India has just filled with me with so much joy. Can't wait for the candidates tournament to start. So, coming to our topic of discussion, sports washing. Now, sports washing basically, refers to the practice where nations, organizations, or even individuals, they use sports as a means to enhance their public image or divert attention from controversial issues through sports. So, this phenomenon generally involves sports events, leveraging sports events or sports teams to create a positive image, often, masking political, social, or even human rights concerns. So it intertwines the realm of sports and politics and tries to, showcase the complex relationship between athletic competition and broader societal dynamics. So it is not a very new concept, but it has gained prominence by the globalization of sports and the increasing connectedness of political and social spheres. So if you see historically, nations have leveraged international sporting events, such as the Olympics, which was hosted by Berlin in 1936, or even the FIFA World Cup hosted by Qatar a few years back. It is, just to showcase their economic prowess, their cultural heritage, and even political influence on the global stage. However, this advent of social media has amplified the reach and impact of sports washing tactics, making it a more prevalent and more nuanced phenomenon in contemporary society. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, you are, yeah.
All right. So when we look towards sports washing, so the biggest example of sports washing, it would be Saudi Arabia's foray into English football. So you all must know that Saudi entities like PIF and others, they have made headlines by acquiring football clubs like Manchester City, even Newcastle United, and as well as signing the star players like Cristiano Ronaldo for their Saudi league. So at first glance, these investments, they may seem like very normal business deals, driven by the desire to capitalize on the commercial opportunities afforded by English football, but they are not. Um, by associating themselves with these big clubs, what they are doing is they are creating nothing but these high profile acquisitions are nothing but means of deflecting attention from Saudi Arabia's human rights record, their political controversies, and even their geopolitical tensions. They just want to present the kingdom in a more favorable light on the global stage. They're doing nothing but, they're glossing over issues such as human rights abuses, restrictions of freedom of expression, and even this ongoing conflict in Yemen. Moreover, this influx of petrodollars and English football also tells you about the integrity of the sports and the football association abroad. Everyone knows that in today's financial in today's time, financial muscle will overshadow sporting merit, and the inferences could be disastrous. I recently read a paper from Sociology of Sports Journal, and it pointed out that sports washing often, sets the stage for military interventions, and new forms of sports washing are emerging. And with authoritarian regimes, they fund teams and even democratic states. So coming back to the events that show, sports washing in its complete sense, there are kind of positives also. So if we take the Qatar World Cup as an example, they couldn't do what they wanted to do. They forgot to understand that, attempts at sports washing can also invite increased scrutiny. Not only has the Qatar World Cup raise the profile of the unjust, kafala labor system. So kafala labor system is a migrant sponsorship system that can lead to, forced labor, but has also raised the ever-present specter of FIFA corruption. Thanks to this relentless pressure from human rights advocates, Qatar amended its kafala system in September. I think it was in 2020, and they became the first Gulf state to allow migrant workers to switch jobs without their employer's permission before their contracts. So it's not a fail-proof system. And coming to India and cricket, so the Indian Premier League, it was launched in, I guess, 2008, and I think it quickly evolved into one of the most lucrative and widely watched sports league globally. So it's not just a cricket tournament. It's a spectacle that captivates millions, not just in India but the world. However, it has also become a prime example of sports washing, where the glitz and the glamour of the cricketing extravaganza mask those underlying issues. Um, if we focus on the league's association with controversies and ethical concerns, so as you know, some team owners have also faced allegations of financial irregularities, and the league itself has encountered scandals related to match fixing and betting. So the IPL represents a very fascinating case study in the area of sports washing. It very naturally highlights the intricate relationship between sports, politics, and as well as public perception. While the league has undoubtedly brought joy and excitement to millions, its association with sports washing raises very important questions about the ethical implications of leveraging sports for image management as well as political gain. Uh, Talking about India, I think it is also about the regional and the national pride associated with the IPL. So, as Balbir talked about scales and fails, I had an idea that this can also be analyzed through, Bodo's concept of field. So the IPL creates a symbolic field where cities and regions, they compete not just in terms of cricketing prowess, but also in terms of economic development and cultural prominence. So hosting IPL matches has become a manifestation of the symbolic struggle for recognition, and this also aligns with Bordeaux's ideas that fields are nothing but arenas of symbolic competition. Um, Wrapping up our discussion on sports washing, I think it's very evident that sports, politics, and public perception are very deeply intertwined. Whether we are talking about events like the IPL or the involvement of countries like Saudi Arabia in English football, the underlying theme is, I feel, how sports can be used to shape people's opinions or, project certain things, certain images. So, for example, when big names or, wealthy individuals, they buy teams or sign star players, it is not just about the sports anymore. It's also about building their reputation or diverting attention from other issues. But this raises question about fairness, honesty, and what values we want our sports to represent. So I think it's very important to keep an eye on these dynamics and make sure that sports remain true to their core values of fairness, integrity, and inclusivity. And by doing so, we can ensure that sports continue to bring people together and inspire us all, regardless of the agendas at play behind the scenes. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aashish, for talking about politics and sports washing. From that, I'll now move on to Aashirwad, who is going to talk about cultural nationalism of football and its changing nature in Northeast India. I think what Balbir mentioned is very important, that all of you have some sort of personal interest when you are talking about sports, because Aashirwad is also a huge fan of football. He is a huge fan of Liverpool and Northeast Highlanders. He has worked with Northeast Highlanders, so I'm sure he's going to be able to speak about it. He's a PhD research scholar in the Department of Sociology at Cotton University. He's also a guest faculty in sociology at the Department of Sociology of Guwahati University, and he's also a member of the Doing Sociology team. So Aashirwad, it's over to you.
Thank you so much, Rituparna, for this lovely introduction. Good evening, everyone present here. First and foremost, my sincere gratitude to Doing Sociology for organizing a discussion on what Eric Dunning, a pioneer on sociology of sport, would term as a subversive subject, one that always takes the back seat within the grand scheme of things in the academic spaces across the world. And of course, many thanks for allowing me the opportunity to share my thoughts in a research career of considerable infancy. Now, today's lecture is a part of my master's thesis that speaks about, cultural nationalism that gives rise to fanaticism in sports and institutionalized form of fan culture, particularly football, and how in turn this particular fanaticism reinforces the nationalistic feelings, whether in the lines of national identity or even ethnic identities. My work, which was done from December 2019 to May 2020 in Guwahati, it tends to understand the influence of the various socio-political forces in the construction of the identity of a fan, as well as the practices that constitutes the habitus of a football fan in particular. In this case, I studied the members of the Highlander Brigade, which is the largest supporters group of Northeast United Football Club, a football franchisee from the Indian Super League. Now, the energy that is invested in a sport, the social relationships developed within a sport, and the mimetic experiences that it provides, all have become a matter of academic intrigue and scrutiny in the past 30 to 40 years, scanty nonetheless. But sports can be perceived as something very sacred and fundamentally distinct from the flow of profane or normal life, simply because of the emotions that it invokes, which can be intensified by certain rituals and taboo processes, as well as the excitement generated by the mega sporting events. Football, in particular, has been closely associated with, social reflections, as the sport deemed to have been a tool of developing masculine traits of leadership, perseverance, and teamwork, which we can go back to even the Victorian era. I think Christian Koller and Fabian Brandl, they have done quite a remarkable work on this particular aspect, the socio-historical significance of football. Now, along with players, spectators, and followers or fans equally contribute to the sustenance of this culture of football. Audiences are usually considered as the endpoint of any cultural process, but they continuously produce and tend to reproduce the culture, and they contribute to the creation of an event which is kind of eligible for being called a spectacle. The particular reality of football, it creates a platform for various human interactions. It facilitates the cognitive spaces, for imaginations associated with identity. And these imaginations are usually directed towards sporting entities such as a team or a club. Now, when we have this new particular identity, this identity positions and affixes itself along with the conventional ascriptive tags that we have of religion, ethnicity, national identity, and so on. So these two different sets of identities, they coincide and collide. The distinctive roles that they bring within a role set, they tend to conjoin and form newer roles. Uh, for recruits of social sciences like us, I think we are quite familiar with the idea of identity and ideas of national identity. And hence, I shall not dwell upon the definitions. But to set the premise, I will try to refer to Benedict Anderson's idea of a nation, which is a political community with a primacy to language, of course, where the interesting part that I could pick out from that is even the smallest member of that particular community will neither completely know a fellow member nor necessarily meet every other one of them. So this is quite synonymous to the idea of a widely spread sporting fan base, where people may not be fully acquainted with each other, but they do share a deep horizontal, sense of comradeship, and it tends to produce loyalty and attachment to a supreme form or a supreme entity. On the other hand, George Orwell, he characterized nationalism as something very obsessive and defensive in the presence of a rival entity or culture. And this is quite similar in terms of what we can see in sporting events, in particular in football. So it arouses a competitive spirit due to either national prestige at stake or regional prestige at stake. For example, in a football match between, let's say, England and France, the fans waving their national flag or singing anthems or coloring themselves with the national colors or performing certain rituals. These sort of things, they would establish and affirm their own national identity. And in turn, it creates a sense of solidarity among their fellow countrymates. And this is the point where an ordinary encounter, it turns into a very sacred one. So we can already see how sporting identities are at a crossroad with national and regionalistic identities, and fanaticism is within a very touching distance of nationalistic feelings. Uh, to talk about ethnic identities, I think we can take the example of Eastern Europe, where the disintegration of Yugoslavia into Croatian, Slovenian, and Bosnian and Serbian identities, it saw a rise in Serbian nationalism against its counterparts. Uh, uh, for example, Red Star Belgrade is a football club in Serbia, and it started its rival. It grew rivals with its Croatian opposites in Dynamo Zagreb, and it is kind of one of the most fierce derbies that we can see, even though not from the same region or same country. And it is at that moment where the baton of national identity is carried over by the community of fans. So there is a juxtaposition of the mushroom identities that emerge based on ethnic origins as well, and that particular phenomenon, it transcends into footballing culture. We can see examples of other places such as FC Barcelona or Athletic Bilbao in Spain, which set themselves against a greater Spanish identity. And it is, I think, a conclusive proof of the reflection of a sub-nationalist or a new nationalist sentiment in football. So football, as we have already discussed, it becomes a politician arena of cultural competition that rides on national or ethnic identities and aspirations. Now, this is what we know about rise of national identity and nationalism in the West. While the West saw this particular concept rising out of an idea of a nation, the Eastern Hemisphere saw it rising out of identities which were kind of subjugated and yearning to be established and recognized. So India saw a kind of a similar attempt to gain such a national consciousness. The ideas of nationalism and footballing origins in India both can be traced back to colonial era of Bengal. The establishment of an anglicized education system exposed the locals, the particular people, a particular section of people to Western ideas of nation and nationalism and all these different phenomena. Bengal also became an center of cultural expression in that sense, whether in literature or art or even in sports. Now, when we talk about football as a sport developing in Bengal, I think the oldest clubs of association football can be traced back to 1878 when the Dalhousie Club of Calcutta back then was established, and in 1872 before that when Calcutta Football Club was formed. And the involvement of the local Bengali people in the Sepoy Mutiny kind of it created a discriminatory attitude in the social paradigm towards the youth by the British, and the British, they saw this particular Bengali youth as very fragile and physically effeminate, and which was in pure contradiction to the masculine nature of football. As I have already mentioned, the Victorian ideals were like kind of standing against to what the Bengalis were portrayed as. Football naturally then became a breeding ground of cultural resistance against such stereotypes. The Calcutta Football Club, which was established in 1872, so it became a symbol of British elitism and was antagonistic to the natives. Uh, Sports historian Kaushik Bandyopadhyay, he has noted that clubs, such as Sobha Bajar Football Club and Mohan Bagan were established by this set of Bengali aristocracy, and it became a symbol of prestige for the Bengali people that created a belief that they would safeguard the cultural identity of the Bengalis. Beating the English in their own game became a very obsessive thing for the local people. That kind of awakened a sense of cultural unity over a cultural identity, a victory of the feeble natives over the superior British. Uh, in 1911, a significant point in history when Mohan Bagan FC it defeated a British team and it won the IFA Shield, and it kind of was a representation that Bengalis could no longer be deemed effeminate or very fragile. But even in this particular scenario, there were certain fault lines that were there to be seen, and these fault lines in this particular cultural nationalism were in terms of religion as well as in terms of ethnicity and culture. Now, in terms of religion, we can see the formation of Muhammadan Sporting FC, which was kind of a response against the Hindu Bhadraloks, and it was kind of a representation of the Muslim population in that particular region. And later on, after the partition of Bengal and the migration of people from then East Pakistan to or East Bengal to the Bengal domain or Bengal region, I think in that particular instance we can see how the local Bengali people were put in contradiction or in cultural contradiction or juxtaposed with the immigrating Bangals. And we can also see such cultural differences or the manifestation of such cultural differences in other domains of social life as well, and not just in sports, but in food and dressing and all these different rituals regarding religious practices. So at that point of time, I think, as Kaushik Bandyopadhyay also noted, that East Bengal Football Club, it became a symbol of culture and identity for the immigrants, for the immigrating population, and it kind of created ruptures along the unified Bengali nationalism that was there when Mohan Bagan lifted the first IFA Shield in 1911. Now, such a similar fault line based on ethnic identities can also be seen in Northeast India that culminated into a community, manifesting regionalistic or even subnationalist ideals. Uh, Now, before we move into football in Northeast, I think it is important to contextualize the rise of subnationalism in this particular region. So this region has been historically perceived to be quite distinct from the rest of India, and it has been noted or academically has been acknowledged quite a lot. According to Subir Bhaumik, Northeast region is the highland societies of Southeast Asia rather than a part of or a part of the mainland India. It resembles more to the Tibeto-Mongolian tribes and the cultural influence of the Indic heartland was to be seen only in Assam, Tripura, and Manipur. So on the political front, according to historian Sanjit Borua, the source of ethnic nationalism or ethnic regionalism was to be found in the cultural homogenization of the British in the 1820s. For administrative convenience, when Bengali was established as an official language in the region, and this consequently led to a sense of hegemony of the Bengali-speaking people in this particular region. And this cultural assimilation was kind of resisted by the ethnic communities, as evident in various ethnic movements in Northeast in the 20th century. Issues of identity and lack of development made the communities conscious of their linguistic and cultural status on a pan-Indian platform. So this particular awakening, according to Paul R. Brass, is the first stage of nationality formation, and in this case, a subnationality. In extreme forms, also we can see such manifestation. According to Sajal, we see those sentiments manifested through violence, secessionism, and insurgency as well. But on a cultural front, I find that football as a sport also became a medium of expression on a national platform. Now, this region has been historically associated with football for a very long time. I mean, from Dr. Talimer and Ao as the captain of the Indian Olympics team, to the immense amount of potential or the talent that the region has offered to the national platform. I think the association of this region with Indian football cannot be questioned. Uh, but Northeast United Football Club, I think, as an entity, I think it was the first time there was an attempt for a consolidated and collective representation of the region on a national platform. Now, even though there have been clubs previously that represented different states, such as Neroka FC from Manipur or Shillong Rajong from Meghalaya, or even Aizawl FC from Mizoram. But Northeast United Football Club, it kind of tried to mitigate the internal differences that the region had by bringing supporters of the club with different ethnic backgrounds together. So as a sporting entity, such feelings were kind of institutionalized, by formation of supporters club, such as the Highlander Brigade, where people of different ethnic backgrounds or religious backgrounds, they came together for just one motive and one entity, and that was kind of a very sacred, that kind of became or transformed into a very sacred entity for these people, for these supporters. Now, Highlander Brigade, which was formed in 2017, it revered the idea of a pan-Indian representation of a regional identity, especially for people in Assam who were kind of craving for representation on a pan-Indian platform, a cultural expression. Now, the rituals involved in this particular supporters club, they tend to increase the solidarity among the members across different class, caste, religion, and gender, which was kind of directed towards a particular entity, Northeast United Football Club, which was again a representation or an expression of this culture of different states or 8 states of the region. As a sacred endeavor, the Highlander Brigade, they are involved in tifo making or choreographing chants or different uses of different art uh, as a medium to reestablish their firm support for an entity that has become a tool of a tool to express their cultural identity. Now, due to various social, political negligence and cultural discrimination, the Highlanders were to be previously seen more attached to the regional identity over national one. And I remember one instance from October 2019 when I attended a practice match between Northeast United and Indian national team, where I could see more support for the club rather than the Indian team. And there was a sense of a hostile atmosphere for a certain player called Sandesh Chingan, who was previously playing for Kerala Blasters. And he kind of developed an animosity with the Northeast United fans. And that kind of, was to be seen, and the response was to be seen on that particular match, where even though being a national team player, he was kind of facing a lot of, a very hostile atmosphere and hostility. And this particular choice of club over country might not be as vivid as Liverpool FC in England or maybe FC Barcelona in Spain, but the underlying emotions, it consolidated the spirit of subnationalism, and it kind of smears the football fans of Northeast India with regional colors. But it does not also mean that the players from this region would not want to represent their country. The region has produced a lot of talent for the national team and is continuing to do so while becoming a football factory. But for the fans, for the members of the brigade, or especially the members of the brigade, there is always an everyday negotiation between the different roles that they are supposed to take. I mean, on match days where Indian team is playing, the members tend to offer their full support to the team. But whenever there is whenever there are club aspirations involved or club ideas or aspirations, identities involved, then I think there is a clear distinction between uh, uh, the representation that they have. Now moving on to the changes that I have recently noticed in my past year or two in my involvement with the particular group, supporters group, is that the whatever socio-political events that have taken place in the social realm has had some sort of influence on the social dynamics in these particular fan groups. The rise of religious nationalism in India has kind of hindered the subnationalist spirit in the community of fans. Now people are not that much vividly riding on subnationalist or regionalistic feeling. They do not have that sense of solidarity in terms of the region, which is kind of waned out because of the impact of the political nature of the society, and it has kind of had a quite a influence on the aspirations of the fans as well. Now the negotiation between someone who belongs to India and someone who belongs to Northeast, that negotiation is kind of the dynamics of the negotiation has kind of changed. Even though they are closely associated with the club and the region, that particular dichotomy of club and country has kind of receded. Additionally, the religious polarization that has been a subject of academic intrigue or even policy making and whatnot. So that particular religious polarization, whether it's subtle or overt, has had a tremendous impact in the social dynamics within the group. Now, previous to the group, they used to have people of different backgrounds working together for the same cause. But now, as I have noticed so far in the past year or two, the behavior and the dialogues and the interactions have changed massively. Many interactions have even stopped from happening, and I think this kind of reflects on how sport cannot be something which is kind of separate from whatever socio-political events that we have, and it is there to be seen how this particular dynamics unfolds or changes in the near future, and defines the way and the fans of this particular club they represent themselves. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aashirwad, for talking about cultural nationalism and football in northeastern part of India. Our last speaker is Dr. Pratichi Majumdar. It's a tough job to introduce Pratichi because I've known her for more than a decade. She teaches sociology at the Indraprastha College for Women, University of Delhi. She has a PhD from the Center for the Study of Social Systems, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She has done her postdoctoral research as part of the ESRC funded Gen V project, Urban Transformations and Gender Violence in India and South Africa, based at the University of Cambridge. Her areas of academic interest include digital sociology, new media and popular culture, sociology of development, and gender and human rights. She is an avid chess fan, and she's going to today talk about online chess boom in India, a study of fan communities in the pandemic. And let's hear from Pratichi. Over to you.
Hi, Rituparna, and hello to everybody else. As Balbir said, it is an immensely personal journey as a researcher of sports, I think, and I'm sort of venturing into that, but I'm primarily somebody who looks at digital community. So what I'm going to talk about is a very specific kind of digital community in sport. Will it be okay if I share my screen? I would like to show some images, if that's all right.
Sure,
Yeah.
sure. Yeah, I've now given you right. Yeah. Oh.
Yeah. So I'm going to speak about the online chess boom in India, and I'm very happy that Aashish spoke about chess a little bit in his introduction, because usually otherwise all sociology of sports panels start with a discussion about whether chess is a sport or not. So I'm very happy that at least that kind of introduction is not doesn't need to be given here. But yeah, there is a conversation, of course, as to whether mind sports should be considered as sports, or are they board games and everything. People have different opinions about this, and it basically depends on whether you, what is your definition of sports? Is it just physical activity, or is it other things as well? And right now with chess, particularly given that it's a part of the Commonwealth games, given that the Olympic Association recognizes it as a sport. I don't want to get into the discussion about how chess basically qualifies as a sport, and I'll probably just start with the idea of the fan community around chess. And again, thanks to Aashirwad that he's, spoken about the idea of community so in such a detailed manner in his presentation. What I would like to pick from that is, of course, how he mentioned Anderson and the notion of the imagined community. And because I'm going to speak about the fan community in the digital space, Anderson's notion of, all communities being imagined ones becomes all the more important when we are speaking about virtual communities. So the kind of community that I'm going to talk about is, of course, something that happened very, very recently in history and the world history indeed. And I'm going to speak about the pandemic a little bit. So with the pandemic, what happened primarily was that we were at a lockdown and we were asked to socially distance ourselves, meaning that, of course, we couldn't have physical contact with each other, and in order to sort of minimize the spread of the pandemic, which meant that so many of our activities were classified as essential and non-essential, and both the essential and the non-essential then moved to the virtual space, right? So the internet was being used for communication, banking, schools, businesses, everything, but also a lot of entertainment and sports would then move online because, of course, a lot of the international sporting events and entertainment events were being cancelled and due to the lockdown, and we couldn't physically go into these stadiums. You couldn't physically go as audience members or as sports fans to go and witness the different kinds of sports that were being played. And it is sort of in this background that online chess in India became a really big thing. And in India, what happened specifically is that there was a confluence between comedy and chess. There were a lot of stand-up comedians. There were a lot of different types of artists who were now also not able to go to their works, just like the sports persons, which meant that they were using platforms like YouTube and Twitch and other social media to live stream. Right. So we would have a lot of live streaming of music. We would have a lot of content creators coming up who were participating in many kinds of podcasts and discussions, but also they were playing many games, and they were playing many video games. They were playing esports, which became one of the ways in which they were entertaining the audience, and a lot of the audience would join in. And it's within this specific context that many of the young comedians from India, they started chess streams, and this was something that they generally enjoyed, and they just started streaming games that they were playing and they were enjoying. This is not to say that chess streaming never happened before this. There were platforms like chess.com and chess24 and Lichess who had a digital platform and a digital presence much before the pandemic as well. And they often had, grandmasters and international masters come onto the streams where they would have them explain the different kinds of games. But of course, these were very, very educational and sort of serious streams, which were catering to a very small group of chess enthusiasts and amateur players who would, understand what these grandmasters were talking about, or at least try to understand and, have the sort of a grasp of the complexity of the game a little bit. But what happened with these comedians streaming chess in the Indian case is that chess was now being presented as something that was fun and something that was lighthearted, and it was a way of bonding with friends while you were chatting and you were maybe eating and sipping tea, and while doing that you were also playing a game of chess. And this meant that what was happening is that these were not grandmasters and international masters who were playing games and trying to educate the public about the sport, but rather these were amateurs and beginners who were making mistakes, and they were laughing and they were chatting through the games, and they were cracking jokes because primarily these were comedians. And they were also introducing many fun new formats to the game. For example, they would play with the audience. They would, play things like hand and brain, where one person would say the chess piece and the other would make a move. And lots of different kinds of formats were being introduced. The focus here was much more on entertainment rather than the quality of the game itself, which was the focus of course, the chess player streams previously. And this made chess, which has the reputation of being something that is very boring and something that is very nerdy, and often an intellectual and scary sports to something that could be enjoyable and something that could be spectator friendly, and in general much more palatable to a very young audience who was tuning in to watch these games. These comedians, of course, had a huge fan base and already, and through these streams, through the pandemic, because there were more and more people who were trying to look for entertainment online, they got even a bigger fan base. There were many young fans, particularly within the age group of 16 to say 30, who were now being attracted to the game. And what you found was the viewership and the popularity of the stream started drawing the attention of the chess players themselves. And we had, many of the professional players, many grandmasters, many international masters, many chess coaches who would now make an appearance on to these comedian streams, right? And there somehow became a very easy camaraderie between the comedians and the chess players themselves. And you would find that, on the one hand, what was being highlighted was this expertise of the grandmasters who could, play chess blindfolded, who could, beat the amateurs in, say, 30 seconds, where these guys had 5 minutes, 10 minutes. But what we also found that since a lot of the chess players themselves were young men and women, they also had a very casual banter and sort of a normal, relatable way of interacting with these comedians and with the audience, which meant that, this serious aura that is associated with chess and chess players was starting to diminish even further. We found that many chess players themselves started tutorial streams and tournament coverages where they would be playing some games and also explaining their moves to the audience in a much more casual and fun manner. And this again kept on attracting more and more audience. The main okay, these are some images about headlines in newspapers about the popularity of chess during the pandemic, and we saw, how many different newspapers and media started grabbing this as something unique that was happening in India during the pandemic. But the rise of the fan community itself happened at a very specific point in time, which was the online chess Olympiad during the 2020, during July 2020. Of course, the official over-the-board Olympiad could not happen because of the pandemic, and FIDE, which is the International Chess Federation, announced the online chess Olympiad, and a lot of the players who were playing on the Indian team had now taken to streaming and had become household names. And these were people with whom the audience had already, developed a certain kind of connect. So even before the tournament officially started, we saw that the fan base was very excited, and more than the official promotions, more than the official platforms, it was the fans who were promoting the event and promoting the tournament amongst each other, amongst their friends, sharing things on social media, etc. What happened during the early stages of the Olympiad was because a lot of these players, they were playing from home. There were some internet disruptions and electricity disruptions, which meant that the Indian team lost a couple of games which they were winning. And there was a huge uproar online, and there were fans that were calling out to the Chess Federation, talking about how they could not provide infrastructure to the players. And but also what we found was a lot of the fans then reaching out to help. So you had, many students who would offer the team that you could come to our college and play from here because we have very stable internet connections. You had, others who were offering technical advice to the team and, writing to the captain and vice captain of the team, who were also streaming that, this is the way that you can actually fix the internet connection. And in fact, it was one of the audience members, one of the fans, who actually helped them stabilize the connection through various technical support. So what we then had was India finally going on to win the Olympiad gold. And that also, we found that the announcement for the same was made when the FIDE official director, Grandmaster Sutorsky, he chose to come to the unofficial stream of the comedians rather than the official stream, because this was the stream where you had, suddenly 65,000 people live watching chess, which was almost unheard of at that point in time, because of course this huge kind of spectatorship is not something that one associates with chess as a sport. For the first time, the international community then started taking notice of India and Indians as a potential chess market, and what this sort of went to meant that a lot of the Indian players were getting more invites to international tournaments, because you knew that the Indian audience would tune in to watch them. What it meant was a lot of new sponsorship was now directed towards Indian chess, and for the first time you had many of the Indian local tournaments that was attracting sponsorship from big companies. And as a result, what happens is that the entire audience base and the fan community, through these live streams, through these social media platforms, come together as a fan community. The fan community that develops around chess during the pandemic is also as I said, is a group of young men and women who are coping with anxieties of the pandemic. These are young men and women who are stuck at home, who are, unable to go outside and meet people. And as a result, they were, constantly within this anxiety. So a lot of speaking to a lot of these fans, some of them were telling, some of them were sort of talking about, how they did not have friends who were active, and online chess became an escape for them. When the streamers would bring along their friends, they felt that they were part of the gang. Similarly, another person who was an Indian young engineer who lived in Cardiff at that time said that, how COVID was forcing everybody to sort of remain inside and look for content online. And it was during the lockdown when they were alone, they would wait for the chess streams, and they would cook and eat while watching the chess streams. And this became a sort of way to feel a connection with the outside world, which was not being possible during the pandemic. You had a lot of the fan community coming together, helping out with charity events and raising funds. You had a lot of the members of the community who were trying to, come up with new apps and websites to help the streamers, or to sort of, help the coaches with interactions on the live stream and everything. But also these communities then went much beyond the actual sport itself, right? It was about forging friendships. It was about forging connections. So you had, people coming together on apps like Discord, where you were having conversations about chess, but the conversations did not, limit themselves only to chess-related themes. People were studying together. People were, making music and making videos. There were friend groups which were discussing films and playing different kinds of games. And what this meant was you had a sort of way to approach each other socially through the virtual world, even if you were practicing what was being called as social distancing, right? So you were making friends in live chat. And you were, as a result, also dealing with the anxieties of pandemic, because you realized almost everybody was in the same boat. So within sociology, then, as we call, this was not something that was social distancing, but this was a distant form of socialization that was being now made possible through the digital space. When we speak about digital communities, often this idea that is persistent is that because it is virtual, it is not real. right? But of course, we've had many scholars within sociology, within digital sociology, starting from Manuel Castells, who talk about this idea of real virtuality and talking about how this divide between the virtual and real is not really tenable in the present scenario anymore. And the digital space today then becomes the space for cultural expressions. The digital space becomes this sort of space where you could meet people even if you're not technically, physically in the same room. And this is what was happening with the digital fan community around chess as well. This is not to say that there were no fissures within the community and, this is all romanticized and all hunky-dory. Of course, with the internet, with the virtual communities, new kinds of anxieties creep in. And one of the things that has been in news recently is this discussion on, using of unfair means in chess events and how to sort of curb that and control that. Fan wars is something that you find in all fandoms, and which shows that fandoms are not this, cohesive communities where everything is hunky-dory, but you have, these extreme sorts of groups where people can, it can range from very innocent sort of competitiveness to something that can become quite harassing to the players and other fans. But also the structural issues in terms of what kind of chess was being watched. And what we found was, women's chess was not getting the same kind of reception as men's chess was getting. Who was watching these streams? We found that it was majorly young men as against young women who were watching these streams. Though you did have women tuning in, but the participation rates was very low. Even when women were tuning in, the number of women who were then commenting or participating in the live chat was very little. And this is consistent with what you find in other online spaces, in other online communities as well. Because of course, deception and cyberbullying and trolling is something that exists for everybody, but in particular for women, what is being often referred to as gender trolling. You find that much more prevalent, and this is something that existed even in the chess world and even within the chess community. So basically what we then can say is that the online community and the virtual community can challenge identities and hierarchies of the physical world, but at the same time can also carry them into the virtual space. So division of gender, language, nationality, class status, all of them can, still be part of the digital world, and the communities in the online world are not, necessarily very cohesive and together. But the main crux of what I wanted to speak through this presentation is this connection between sports and the connection between the internet and the digital technologies. And because in today's world, the digital technologies are, so sort of embedded in everyday structures and in almost all aspects of our everyday life, it becomes but obvious that sports would also see the same kind of impact. In case of chess, of course, the sport itself moved online, and online chess has become a big part of the chess world today. But also you can think about other sports where you have, these online platforms and online fandoms where the digital space becomes the way for fans to then express themselves. And therefore, discussion of the digital space, the digital practices becomes very important in terms of thinking about online solidarities in sports, thinking about conflicts and negotiations in sports. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Pratichi. So I had thought of asking some questions, but I think there's no need, considering that all of you have already talked about the personal, the theoretical, and the methodological ideas and inspirations behind doing a sociology of sports. as well as challenges that Balbir had initially mentioned. And then, you have also brought in about the digital context. So I'm going to leave it at this, considering that this is an introductory video to how we had imagined that this discussion will take place in terms of introducing viewers to issues and trends in the sociology of sports, and then, of course, carrying forward the conversation. So thank you so much for giving us this very engaging presentations. There was a lot to take from each of them. I personally learned a lot, even though I'm an avid sports fan myself, and that brings in the personal again. And yeah, so thank you so much to each of you. And I hope that we'll get a good response to this and have much more engaging discussions on a subdiscipline of sociology, which is, emerging. So thank you.
Thanks a lot.